Everybody, welcome back to the Overwatch Report. I'm Brad.
I'm Ben.
Ben, the day has finally come. We need to talk about the Shanghai Dragons, for you to give us the real insight and for me to shit-talk them. Although, looking at this team, I probably won't be shit-talking them as much as I wish I could.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually the second time we've talked about the Shanghai Dragons. We did a video, like a post-mortem video about them at the end of last season, talking about why did they go 0-40.
Yeah, so I was, of course, fascinated by them. I don't actually dislike them. I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to this team in general. It's just the level at which they were bad was like something that is incredible to me. To lose 40 games in any sport is just unreal. So I had to make a video on them, and then it's kind of become a little bit of a meme in a way.
For sure,
a group of me just like hating the Shanghai Dragons, even though I'm fairly certain that the Shanghai Dragons are Mega's favorite team. So
yeah, so I mean, they're a lovable group, and this season coming in, they're going to be like the lovable underdogs, or they're going to be one of the lovable underdog teams.
Right.
And I think they're going to win a game probably in their first 3 games. I think they have a pretty tough start to their season, I think, but they're going to win one of their first 3 games. I think my prediction is their first win is going to be against Boston Uprising.
Oof, got to do it too. I'm sure if that's the case, I won't hear the end of it.
Yeah, no, it's gonna hurt, but it's gonna feel good for the Dragons fans.
Right.
So.
Let's get down to business. We're starting off with the coaches. First up, the head coach is Blue Haz, and he's a South Korean coach. He used to coach for Panthera, and he joined September of 2018. Tell me a little bit about him.
Yeah, so the big story about this rebuild of the Dragons is them bringing in 4 previous Kongdoo Panthera players. Mm-hmm. And, Kongdoo Panthera, they're now known as Team Griffin, literally just changed their name. But the old Kongdoo Panthera from seasons 1 and 2 of Korean Contenders were a really strong team. They lost to the then underdog Runaway team in season 2. They put up a really good fight in that season, and this team has not only picked up their coach Blue Haz, but they've picked up 4 players who are from their starting roster in season 2, which we'll talk about. So that's it's good that they have the coach to have the synergy here, because a lot of what the Dragons are doing now is they're moving from what was an all-Chinese roster before they brought in the Korean players mid-season to now basically an all-Korean roster minus Dia.
Let's move on to the assistant coaches. First, we have Creed, who is a Chinese coach. He was formerly a coach for the Miraculous Youngsters, and he joined in March of 2018.
Yeah, so he was brought on as a coach during their mid-season rebuild in season 1 after all of the drama with Undead. And then they had to, drop Undead from the team. They picked up Gregory Fearless, Sky, and Otto. So obviously that didn't really work out. Creed was a better coach than what they had before, which was basically like a total mess as far as management and coaching. There was a lot of drama and let's just say bad decisions in coaching and management. So I want to go too far into the drama here, because that's behind the Dragons. But I think that Creed as a coach under another more experienced and successful coach could do a good job. I think that he was just kind of overwhelmed in the position because it was his first kind of big role.
All right, yeah, fair enough. And like you said, we're moving forward, Ben. We don't need to retread the past in what was a 0-40 season. But we're not talking about how they didn't win any games last year or anything about this year. And I certainly won't bring up the fact that they lost all of their games last year.
Yeah, we don't want to bring that up. We don't want to bring up the 0-40 record.
Right, exactly.
We should not talk about it.
It's just petty.
Yeah. It's not important.
Right. All right, so let's talk about Levi, the South Korean coach who coached for Element Mystic and joined in November of 2018.
Yeah, so he is coming in during the postseason one rebuild where a lot of these players were also picked up. He has worked with Fearless in the past on Element Mystic before Fearless was picked up midseason last year. And I mean, Element Mystic is a very strong team, and they're still very strong. They're in the Korean Contenders Finals again. So like that's a proven record of coaching or being like in a successful team as a coach. So I think that he's a good addition. I don't know too much about him beyond just like the role within Element Mystic, but that's a good resume point, and the Dragons certainly need more coaching staff with successful backgrounds rather than kind of this mess that they had last season,
right? And
especially early last season.
I think these three coaches look pretty good on paper, so I'm excited to see how that affects the team moving forward. But I think more importantly, let's talk about the players. Dia is a returning player. He's from China. He's DPS, and his mains are McCree, Tracer, Doomfist, and Widowmaker. Tell me a little bit about him.
Yeah, so Dia is the only player left from the original Chinese Shanghai Dragons roster. The other two returning players from last season were picked up mid-season. So he is not only the only Chinese player on the team, he's the only original roster player from the team. And he was probably the best player on the Dragons last season. He'd be very impressive when he would go off. He actually is also pretty strong on Farah, even though that wasn't one of the heroes that you listed.
This is not according to Liquidpedia, okay?
Yeah. But yeah, he's also, he's a very, like, when Widowmaker was within the meta, when like the dive meta was happening, he was very strong on Widow as well. But he was also a little bit inconsistent. When he would pop off, he would be very impressive and take over situations and fights. But there were consistency issues. He was also on leave for about 2 weeks to deal with some family things, so he wasn't playing the entire season. But I think that with a better roster behind him, so that he's not going to be like focused down all the time, that's definitely he has definitely the potential to be a star again.
Sounds great. Let's move on to Gregory, a returning player, the only female player in the Overwatch League, and she is from South Korea, and she plays tank, and her mains are Zarya, Diva, and Orisa. And I think just of note, which I found really funny, before she was on the pro circuit, she was accused of aimbotting, and some of the players who accused her were like, if I'm wrong, I'll quit, and then she proved them wrong, and they did actually quit Overwatch, which is hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, at least temporarily, some of them.
Right. Some of them come back. But just the idea that she was like, oh, really? You think I'm aimbotting? Well, actually, I'm not. I'm actually just a skid. It's pretty funny.
I mean, it's also it's funny that like she kind of put them in their place, but it's also like sad that it was a thing that happened in the first place.
No, yeah, of course. Of course. It sucks that sexism led to it. It's just funny that she was able to shut it down temporarily for this particular moment.
Yeah, and I mean, so talking about Gregory outside of being the only woman in the league and being like having all of the history behind her as a player, just like looking objectively at her, she's a very strong Zarya player, and I think a lot of the issue where she wasn't performing as well last season was because she was forced into a role playing Diva, and now with Diva potentially being nerfed out of competitive capability.
Major nerfs on Diva.
Yeah, maybe she'll be able to flex back over to Zarya. She'll be able to be more in a comfortable position on that hero. And it's very confusing right now because like the meta is so up in the air as to like what's going to be good in a month when the league starts. And maybe there's less of a focus on tanks because tanks have been nerfed so hard. But I think that in general, the balance patch is going to help the Dragons. They have brought on some good DPS players we'll talk about, who have kind of been shunted into the background because of the way the meta has played. But I think that in general, as a tank player, Geggery is probably going to do better after the patch. So I think she's good. Hopefully, with a better team behind her, similar to Dia, where she is an impressive player who is kind of like relegated to playing on a team that particularly had just no support. And like being a tank player where your supports are awful is like not a good position to be in. Like, because so much of your ability to perform well is connected to the support player who is pocketing you, for instance, not just like sucking and dying all the time. So.
Oh man! All right, well, let's move on to another returning player, the final one, Fearless. He is a tank, and his main is Winston.
Yep, his main is Winston, and he's a very strong Winston player. But he's kind of like one trick, in my opinion, and as far as like being like a really, really good Winston player, but not really like doing well when he has to play other heroes. Like recently, he's had to play Reinhardt because Reinhardt has been the primary main tank hero.
Right.
But he hasn't done super great in that role. And again, with the balance patch, I don't know what exactly, like whether or not a main tank is even going to be like an important position within the new compositions that are discovered.
Right.
Oh,
yeah, we're kind of like last episode. We were flying blind in the sense that we knew what nerf was coming, but we didn't know what it was. Now we know what it is, but we don't know how it's going to affect people. So
last time we knew we didn't know things, but we didn't know what we didn't know.
Right.
Now we know what we don't know, but we still don't know those things.
Right. things we know, things we don't know, and things we are clueless about entirely.
Right. So there's like 3 levels of not knowing things. Last time we were on like level 3 of not knowing things, and now we're on level 2. So there's still a lot of question marks as the new meta is kind of figured out, and whether or not we're going to see like a Dive 2.0. I know that a lot of people think that Reaper is going to be kind of like an unstoppable force because of the buffs. So maybe there's going to be some kind of composition that's built around supporting like a Reaper meta. So we'll see. But yeah, I think the Fearless is very strong, particularly on Winston, and hopefully he'll see a role within the new meta.
All right, fair enough. Let's move on to DM, South Korea player. He played for Lucky Future, DPS with McCree, Widow, and Soldier 76. Right,
so we have DM here who is known for being really close friends with Carpe, who is, he figured it out. Put 2 and 2 together there. So they actually, named themselves complimentary. It's kind of like one of those like BFF like friendship necklaces where the hearts meet together. So
it's a shame that they're not playing together.
Yeah, they're on separate teams now. Carpe is obviously one of the best Widowmaker players in the league. He's playing for the Philadelphia Fusion. And also DM is a very strong Widowmaker player. He's probably the best DPS player on this team. And I mean, actually, Dia is probably slightly better. It's hard to say. So we'll see between him and Dia who actually fills in that role. It's probably going to be Dia, and then maybe we see DM. It's very difficult because they both are very similar names.
Yeah.
And maybe we see
talk about Ding with 2 Ds. It's a mess.
Yeah. So yeah, lots of DI names in this team. So maybe there's going to be some kind of quad DPS composition that sees play in a lot of maps. There was a lot of people or a lot of teams playing quad DPS as like a potential counter to goats in the on like certain maps, like especially on like escort maps, for instance. So maybe that's something that we could see, and then we'll see maybe a 3 DPS players plus like a Zarya or something like that. And at that point, maybe DM sees some starting time. He is a very strong player. It is interesting that they put a lot of their like pickup equity into another player who is who like has a lot of overlap with Dia. But yeah, he's good. I'm excited to see him play in Overwatch League.
All right, so let's move on to the aforementioned Ding with 2D's South Korean player. He played for Panthera, he's Flex, and his mains are Pharah and D.Va.
Yeah, so it's actually interesting because one of the main issues that he had on Kongdoo Panthera, particularly when you look at the finals match with Runaway in Season 2, was that that he wasn't flexing to D.Va enough. Like he was being too dependent upon playing Pharah on pretty much every single map. But that's not really going to be an issue anymore, probably, because it seems like it's more likely that that Pharah is going to see play than D.Va at this point.
Right. He's
so
ahead of his time.
Right. So that issue of flexibility is probably not going to be that big of a disadvantage. And he is an incredibly good Pharah player. So we have our third potential really strong DPS player. So we're seeing a situation where the Dragons, maybe in anticipation of a nerf, kind of put all of their eggs into like this DPS basket and was like, hey, DPS players aren't seeing play right now, but after I bet as soon as a nerf comes down for goats, everyone's the DPS is going to be the strongest role. So
right, and I mean especially with the pro teams where it's kind of like a big advertising avenue for the game as a whole. Blizzard doesn't want like just 6 or 7 players being used over and over, so it makes sense that they would kind of prepare like, hey, well, these players are pretty much eliminated entirely, so let's bank on them being a big part of it moving forward.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about Youngjin. He's a South Korean player, also played for Panthera, DPS, Soldier 76, Genji, and Brigida.
So here's another player who had issues with flexing to a GOATS composition, but who was very strong in the classical DPS role. He's an incredibly good Genji player, but he was forced into playing Brigida in like GOATS, and you could see him having issues, particularly with synergizing his Brigida play with the Reinhardt, who isn't on this team. He's one of the only players from Kongdoo Panthera that wasn't picked up by the Dragons. But yeah, so it's a very similar story to Ding, where he's like very much helped out by the balance patch. He has a comfort pick in Soldier who might see an increased amount of play. Genji and Sombra are probably going to see an increased amount of play as well, and he's very good on both of those heroes as well. So maybe with the new meta, there might be some kind of, like I said, like a Dive 2.0 setup with like a Mei or Roadhog as like the kind of tank you put in. Then yeah, his skills could really be very useful for this team.
All right, great. So moving on to Guardian, South Korean player, played for Toronto Esports, was a flex and mains D.Va. Ben, what does that mean now?
Yeah, what is a D.Va now? I don't know about that. That's a big rip.
Yep.
And even before the nerfs, like he wasn't super strong even on D.Va, which was his primary hero of choice. So it's kind of an issue in my opinion. I'm not really sure why he was picked up, but I guess they need another potential like off tank player, especially if you see Gaggery kind of flexing away from that role a little bit. But I don't see him really in a starting role, and I don't really see him kind of in the position to play much at all, even beyond that. So it's going to be interesting. He's not a bad player, but he's kind of just he doesn't really fit on what this team is trying to do, in my opinion. So
right. Does have a cool name, though. I always like Guardian. So move on from a cool name to a preposterous name. Let's talk a little bit about Luffy. South Korean player, also played for Panthera. He's a support. Mains Ana, Mercy, and Zenyatta. Tell me what he brings to the table, Ben.
What he brings to the table is a really great Ana play, and he's also a pretty decent Zenyatta player. It's going to be kind of interesting to see what support heroes kind of cycle in. It's likely that Zenyatta still sees a lot of play, but maybe the play style of Zenyatta isn't going to be as necessary with a lot of DPS players and with fewer tanks that you have to support with like your Orb of Harmony kind of setup. So we'll see. Him and Koma, who we're going to talk about next, are the only support players on the team. They're both coming from Kongdoo Panthera. They have existing synergy, and they're definitely going to both see starting play because they're the only supports. So,
all right, well, take it from there. Let's talk a little bit about Koma. South Korean player, also played for Panthera, of course. Support, and Lucio and Ana are his mains.
Yeah, so he's mostly been playing Lucio, and it's probably pretty likely that Lucio is going to continue to be very strong going forward. And he's also been pretty decent on Mercy as well in the past. So coming from what we talked about at the beginning of the issues that the Dragons had last season were that they didn't really have good support players. And a lot of the issues with the team were because the rest of their team didn't have the support players that they needed to be able to actually perform at a high level. And they kind of depended upon players like Dia to kind of just go off and do like crazy Widowmaker stuff in order to be able to catch up.
Right. And it didn't work that great.
No. There were, there
were times. Yeah.
People forget that there were, maybe 5 or 6 matches where the Dragons almost won.
Right.
But that's still not good, right?
Right.
So it is good that we have that the part of the investment that was made into this team with picking up Kongdoo Panthera was picking up their 2 primary support players in Luffy and Koma. And they're both very strong, and that's exactly what the team needs. So.
All right. Well, Ben, let's close this out. Where do you think this team is going to finish? What kind of season are we looking for? It can't be any worse than last season.
It can't be, but well, I mean, I guess yeah. they can only lose 28 games this season, right, theoretically, right?
It's somehow even easier for them.
Yeah, I think the Dragons are actually going to do pretty good. They've made the changes that they need to make. There have been other teams who we're going to talk about coming up pretty quickly who did not make the changes that they needed to make. Right. So the Dragons have made the changes they need to make. I think they're probably going to end up like 9th or 10th place at the end of the season out of 20.
Hey, that's a lot better.
Right, and especially because of the way the expanded playoff schedule is working, where the top 12 teams are going to make it through, where it's like top 6 plus 6 wildcard slots. It's pretty likely that the Dragons are going to fill one of those wildcard slots, and they couldn't make it through. So
I know Maggie will be pulling for them. I'll ironically root against them, but I do hope that they're able to pull it together, because no one really wants to see them, do as poorly as they did last year. Ben, is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
No, I'm excited to see them bounce back, hopefully.
As am I. All right, guys, thank you so much for checking this out. Make sure that you like, subscribe, share it with all your friends, and leave us a comment down below on how you think that the Dragons are going to do next season. Ben, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Ben Sharon, so follow me there. I'll like maybe 1 in 10 of my tweets is about esports, so that's good.
Right. And you can follow me at TheFakeBMar, that's MARR. And of course, follow WickedGoodEverything at WGEverything. Subscribe to us here on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. Ben, Jenny, Maddie doing great stuff with streaming. We have a long anniversary stream coming up on the 26th of January. You don't want to miss it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and goodbye.